Lo Sihiye Mishakeila. Learn the Maamar based on the psukim, on the verses from Parshas Mishpatim, that there will not be a bereaved or barren woman in your land. I will fill the number of your days. Follows the verse of you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and remove illness from your midst. These two verses contain the three fundamental brachas of life: parnasa, sustenance, and life and health, and children, not just to have in abundance, to have in the best way possible, etc. Amen. So it should be. We ask the question: is this a command or a promise? Make sure there's none of this, or I assure you there will be none of this. It's actually both. When we do what we're supposed to do, then Hashem comes through with the brachas. Amen. So it should be. In a visible sense. What do we do? We're supposed to do. We're looking at the word of avadtem, that you should serve God. It doesn't say love God and you'll get these blessings. Fear God, you'll get these blessings. Here specifically, it's using the word of service. The Torah is very specific. We're asking the question, why the word of service? Service implies that there's a master who hires a servant because there's a lack there. And then both will be fulfilled. The servant through being useful and doing what he's supposed to be doing. The master getting the fulfillment fulfilled. And now we have a great symbiotic relationship. Why are we using the word of avadtem in our relationship to God and serving God when God doesn't lack anything? He doesn't need anything. We don't fill anything that's a void for God. Why this language? That begs the question, does our service down here actually affect him? In general, we use the word avodah in talking about Chassidic lexicon. We mean divine service specifically, even though the word avodah means work. But here we specifically mean our divine service, as in, remember we said it's like the word of tanning a hide. You're going to take our coarse, natural nature and refine it, work it into something refined in our service of God. Does our service make a difference to him through this process? One side says no, it makes no difference. This is actually all about letzarif, to refine us. The whole divine service is just for us refining ourselves, refining the world around us. The other side of it says actually our divine service does make a difference. We can increase or decrease per se the name of God on high in the world, etc., according to what we do. And we saw verses with that. That brought us to, what do you mean, yes or no? It says, okay, well, it depends where you're looking. From the level of the attributes, the emanations, it's the first realization of the attributes, we call the emanations, coming out of the highest dimension of existence, the world of Atzilus, doesn't see itself as being separate from God, just a reflection, projection from God. For us, it seems this is a new thing that's being created. Creation doesn't come until you get to the dimensions below that. One way or the other, once you go to the highest point, where do we affect God? It's not just the emanations, but the source of the emanations. So that'd be the 10 attributes and the lower level of Keser, which is Arach Anpin, the level of will and desire. The more internal level, the level above that, the level of delight, that we call the level of Atik Yamin, that's a level that's separate, removed from the days, removed from creation, removed from all the attributes, etc. On that level, so far we're saying we don't affect at that level. There's one level that we affect, one level that we don't affect. That's what it looks like here. How is it that we affect? Because this whole idea of the attributes are called vessels, Kalim. Divine energy is given to these vessels, and because of the vessels, they take on a shape and a form. This is not called wisdom. This is not called understanding, kindness, etc. As we know from Elijah the prophet, from Pasach Aliyah, the whole description about how God, you work through kindness, but you cannot say that you are just kindness. So God is not contained in any one of these, but God works with the world, interfaces with the world through these. The thing about the vessels is that that's the first realization of an entity that we don't just call God's essence. We now give it something else, even though we recognize it's divine energy, but it's still something that we're giving another name to. Take that idea of having another entity outside of essence, per se, take it all the way down, eventually you get us. As in human beings walking around, we have a divine energy in us, soul within us, we have this divine life force within us, and we're walking around and we assert ourselves as separate entities. If we do what we're not supposed to do, God forbid, then we're taking the whole concept of a separate entity, which God gave us, so that I don't want you to just be robots, I want you to be a separate entity to now choose me. I've concealed myself in the world, your job is to now reveal me in the world. You have to undo what I did. Get the turtle out of the shell. That's what your job is. Us, the body being a vessel for the soul, our job now, in the most physical form of what it means to have divine light, divine energy, and a vessel, we are supposed to be choosing him. And when that vessel and divine energy, when you take that to not choose him, then all the way up at the source it gets affected. All the way up at that first realization of what it means to be a separate entity gets affected. Which means that the vessels, something happens to the vessels. They break, they get punctured, etc. And now the divine light doesn't want to go down into the vessels anymore, because I gotta go into a leaky vessel. So the whole system that we have set up with these attributes, when we do mitzvahs that we're drawing down the divine light, divine energy to come nourish and sustain the world, etc. If we do what we're not supposed to do, we affect that entire flow. That's our whole spiritual ecological system. So on that level, we do affect. We've seen the explanation very clearly of how we affect is because of all that we've just said. The source of it is also affected. So it's kind of like the spring that feeds the rivers and the streams and the lakes, etc. That also eventually could get affected. Even though it's higher up, but because that's where it's sourced from, it gets affected. The source of all sources, what's higher than even that source, not the source of emanations, but the source of all sources, that's what we're saying right now that we don't affect it. That's not the Yomin level, we don't affect it. Then we got to the idea about how the verse that the Maamar is based on, you see that the speaker switches in the middle of the verse. So first it says, you shall serve God, serve Avaya Lokechem, serve Avaya, your God. And then it switches, it says, and I will remove illness from midst. So we went from a third person, as in some separate entity there, and switched over to first person. Who's the third person we're talking about? Capital N, narrator of the Torah. Because we see that the way that the Torah is written, we say Moshe recorded the Torah, but Moshe didn't write, God came to speak to me, nor do we have, I came to speak to Moshe. It says, Vayomar Avaya said to Moshe, or something like that. Who's relaying this over to us? If it's this third person. You could say, just because the Torah is written in third person, etc. We're saying, no, we're giving a new view on this to say that third person is the essence essence of God. So that's God that's so high above, so far removed, to the extent where it's describing what Havaya, a lower aspect of God that's called Havaya, it's describing its actions in the world as creating, while Kim created, but Havaya is creating, speaking to Moshe and everything else that we see in the Torah. Why are we saying that there's an essence level that's even higher than Havaya, and we're saying Havaya is actually not at the high enough level? Because when we talk about Havaya is Haya, Hove, Yiyeh, is, was, will be. It contains all of time, and so thereby it's above time. It's indicative of infinity. It's a true driving force of creation. It gets packaged within nature because we can't have the raw format of it. Obviously a very high level. It creates the structure of the world, but it's also above it. Just the fact that we could use this language shows that it has some sort of relationship to the world. To say there has to be a higher level of God than just this. God cannot only be defined by this. God is way above all this. That's where we're going to the essence. And then we got to the verse from Hosea. He will grant us life for 2 days. On the third day, he will raise us up and we will live before him. We were discussing what does it mean that it's 2 days and the third day? Almost like that third person narrator. So we saw there's two levels. What we call Mamale Ka'omen, that's love that fills all worlds. That's a level of godliness that we can basically identify, interact with. That's the soul and the body kind of level. Here there is life. Here there's godliness. Versus the level of Sovev Ka'omen, surrounds the worlds. That's the level that's too high up. It cannot be contained. It cannot be personalized. Remember the sunlight in a room. The room gets illuminated by it, but the room does not contain and retain that sunlight. We saw other things for that, but then also the third day, we're going back to the essence of our Ein Sof. To say we're going to live in the natural order of creation, we're going to live within the chain of creation, eventually we'll get raised up to a higher level, this level where the essence is at. We were middle of learning Tanya talking about this idea, kind of started from Mamale and Sovev, about how God is within the world, basically. And then we spoke about how we're middle of learning this section. Unlike a luminary, the sun must shine. It has no choice to shine. So it's light, it gives illumination, but it must give the illumination. It cannot choose to moderate itself. Or the same way that if someone has a will, they can do a lot of things, but that will is limited because we're created entities. So God's divine light, God's divine energy that's coming to the world has both these qualities, but is not limited by either one of them. As in God's light shines, the divine energy illuminates, but it has choice, and that choice is not a limited choice. Then we got to the idea that we can't just have infinity, can't just create where it's at, because if infinity just creates as infinity, you just get more infinity. And then we can't come into existence. So it goes through how God had to compact himself, tzimtzumim, God had to metaphorically set himself aside so that we could come into existence. That is the system that Hashem uses to allow for finite entities to exist. What we're in the middle of is that it's talking about everything that's a created entity. For example, time and space. We mentioned this last time, and some of it's in Tanya, some of it's not. But time, space, even angels, higher souls, etc., they are also not infinite. They are created entities. And we know that because there's measurements to them. The fact that time has a measurement and that measurement changes the amount proves that it's not infinite. So time is actually not infinite. It's a created entity. Space, the fact that we could give a measurement and that measurement changes the number to say it's 1 light year, 2 light year, whatever, that's changing the measurement. It's not infinite because infinity by definition is not affected by what any of the numbers are doing. Looking at that, extending that to angels, angels are also, they're created entities. Even the higher souls, created entities. Everything that's not God is a created entity, even though we're all still extensions of God. Okay, so now we're here in the middle of the Tanya. It's going to continue talking about what we call contractions and then tzimtzumim, the tzimtzum. Now as for the intricate details of the contractions, remember we learned from the Pesach Maamar about the Tzimtzum Arishon. How could a place like Egypt exist? It was such an immoral place. God is so hidden in a place like that, of such immorality. How could that exist? We said it because there's a holy counterpart to it, because the whole world was balanced. And what is that a counterpart to? To the holy initial contraction. The entire world is made, all the different dimensions going from one world, what we call a world, but you call a dimension, going from one dimension to the next. What differentiates them is how hidden God is within those worlds. So in our world, God is basically completely hidden because we don't see godliness. We don't recognize. You can come to learn to spot, oh, here's God, but we don't see it. Not like the way that the higher realms experience God. That's part of how you can have a physical entity. Because we don't see God the way that they see. Going up to the higher realms, you're already in a different state of godly awareness and experience. Here we're looking at the idea that going from world to world, there has to be a contraction and veiling and all this kind of stuff because God is being hidden more and more until you can get to our physical existence. The initial contraction was the most massive of all. Not just because it's the first one, but that's the initial state of God hiding himself for creation to come about. Again, that was necessary because there's no sun rays in the sun. You can't have sun rays unless you quote unquote think you're moving past the sun. But those sun rays don't exist without a sun also. So as much as you can point to 5 million sun rays, but take away the sun, there's no sun rays anymore. Which is also to say that what we see here, wow, this incredible universe is such a minute fraction of what God can do. We don't even realize how infinitesimal the light that we have, the light between all the worlds is compared to the original light. God's essence level is so much muchness, but you're coming down here, it has to be so far removed. We don't even realize how dim it is, comparatively speaking. So now as for the intricate details of the contractions, the tzimtzumim, how they achieve their effect, and what they actually are, this is not the place for their explanation. But in general, there are some something in the nature of an obscuring and concealment of the flow of light and vitality, so that the light and vitality, as in the life force, should illumine and reach the lower creatures in a revealed manner, pervading them and acting in them and animating them in such a way that they exist ex nihilo in only an extremely minute measure, so that they be in a state of finitude and limitation. We have to have a very, very compact version of it, or else we can't exist as we do. Were their life force to be revealed within them, they would be infinite. Contraction, symptom, ensures that the light and vitality of their life force remains concealed from them, and only a minute degree is revealed. The soul that's in our body, we only sense it as such a tiny sense of what it is. This light of vitality, revealed after the contraction, constitutes an infinitesimal illumination, and is truly considered as naught when compared to the quality of the limitless and infinite illumination, and there is no proportion or relationship between them. As in, between what we have, what creation has, and God Almighty himself. I.e., they're not quantitatively different, not even immensely different in quantity, but of a wholly different and incomparable quality. So you can't even compare the two. That's how tiny what we have is compared to what God is. As the term proportion is understood in number values, where the number 1 stands at a certain ratio to the number 1 million, for it is a 1/1,000,000th part of it, as in, the sum of 1 million is the sum of 1,000,000 ones. Subtract 1 and the million ceases to exist in clear demonstration of the relation between 1 and a million. 1 to 1 million, there's a relationship there because 1 million is 1,000,000 ones. But as regards a thing which transcends finitude and numeration, there's no number that can be relative to it. For a billion and a trillion, when compared to infinity, do not even attain the relevancy of the value of 1 in comparison with a billion or a trillion. As in, for the sum of 1 retains some degree of relevance when compared to a trillion as its 1/1,000,000th of it. But even a sum as large as a trillion has no relevance compared to the realm of the infinite. 1 to 1 million, there's a relationship there because 1 million is 1,000,000 ones. 1 to 1 trillion, it's 1 trillion ones. How do we see that there's a relationship? Not just because we're saying it like that, but if you subtract 1, you don't have a trillion anymore. If you subtract 1 from a billion, you don't have a billion anymore. However, when it comes to infinity, what's closer to infinity? 1, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000, 1 trillion. None of them are closer to infinity. That's the point of infinity, is that no number is going to get closer to infinity. If you subtract 1 from infinity, what do you have? You can't subtract 1 from infinity. If you subtract 1 million from infinity, what do you have? Infinite. 1, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000, 1 trillion, none of them can affect infinity. So compared to infinity, all those numbers are like nothing. They're irrelevant to infinity. Remember we said no matter how many finite numbers you add up, you will never reach infinity. So it doesn't matter how big your number is. You can't get closer to infinity because it is infinite. So that's what we're saying before about numbers in space. We say space is infinite as far as the world knows. But at the same time, the fact that you could say space has 1 light year, 2 light year, 3 light years means that in theory, you could reach the end of space. You could quantify it. And that number changes by quantifying it. The number infinity, the entity infinity, can never be changed. It cannot, or else it's not infinite anymore. That means no matter how many finite numbers you add together, you will never reach infinity because they are finite. Here's where we're going with it. We could say us to the angels, that seems so far away. These angels are spiritual entities. We can't fathom them. We kind of know what they look like. We don't. Can we see them? We can't see them. We're not on a level to see them. Us, we're 1 and the angels are 1 trillion. Now, who's closer to God? Who's more of an entity before God? Us or the angels? Neither, because the angels are still created beings. The same way God could snap us in or out of existence, God could snap the angels in or out of existence. The angels cannot experience God's essence. Well, yes, the angels are jealous of us that they want to be able to do a mitzvah. But it's not just that. The angels are no closer to God. You're talking about this essence aspect that's removed from creation. Angels are still created entities. So no matter what, the angels are not getting any closer. We're talking in a spatial sense. We're talking in a sense right now, not of like, oh, when we do a mitzvah, we unite with God's will. We're just saying as entities are existing, which entity is closer to God? You would think, oh, these higher souls and entities must be so close to God, but because God is just infinite, everything is like nothing before him. Everything becomes a zero before infinity. Your number is irrelevant before infinity. What it's saying is that when you're looking at God who's infinite, and you say, oh, but look, he created these higher realms, oh, he created these realms, but everything is just zero before him. We don't even understand how contracted the light is. Because for us, everything is already mind-boggling. Just this world, galaxy, universe, etc. Then you're talking about higher dimensions, all that just seems so far-fetched. We can't even relate to any of that. But ultimately, there is a relationship between us and angels because we're all created entities. We all exist by God's divine life force. It's just revealed in a different measure. When it comes to God Almighty himself, he's infinite. There's no such thing as a created entity. He created the idea of creation. You don't need an electrician to turn on a light switch. The world is rigged already for illumination. And the worst among us and the best among us equally illuminate the world with a mitzvah. Now, the experience that they have of the mitzvah is different. The wattage of the light bulb might be slightly different. Let's say you have a bunch of different levels of ministers. This one's a duke, and this one's a baron, and this one's a whatever. You come before the monarch, you guys are on that thing. He could equally take any of your land. He could equally do anything to any of you. Yes, in the rankings before the plebes, you have different rankings, but before you're king, you guys are all just subjects with fancy titles. Now, where were we? The sum of one retains some degree of relevance when compared to a trillion, as is 1/1,000,000 of it, but even a sum as large as a trillion has no relevance compared to the realm of the infinite, but is variably accounted as nothing. So indeed is the utterly insignificant quality of this minute illumination after the contraction, which clothes itself in the higher and lower worlds in order to provide them with sustenance and life, when compared with the quality of the hidden and concealed light that is of an infinite order, and does not close itself or exercise its influence in the worlds in a revealed manner, providing them with life, but encompasses them from above. That's what we call an or makif. It exerts its influence while remaining on its own level, and is called soviv kol amen, literally encompassing all worlds. See, that just took that and used it in the example of mamale and soviv, that when you have the light that actually enters the world, that is a much smaller light than the light that we call soviv kol amen, that surrounds, encompasses the worlds. That's the light that cannot be personalized. Between one light and another, there's no comparison there between the levels of light. Unlike the light that pervades all worlds, remember mamale kol amen, which permeates and vests itself within them, just as the soul vests itself in the body, the encompassing light remains aloof from the world, infinitely greater light. The meaning of this is not that it encircles and encompasses from above spatially, God forbid, for in spiritual matters the category of space is in no way applicable. Physical objects are spatial, spirituality, however, is non-spatial. The terms encompassing and encircling are never to be understood in their literal physical sense. But the meaning is that it encircles and encompasses from above insofar as the revelation of this influence is concerned. For influence, which is in the category of revelation, you can say influence, light, energy, etc., which is in the category of revelation in the world, as in a light that we can identify or interact with somehow, can experience it somehow, is referred to as investiture, being clothed within the world. For the influence that they received is clothed and comprehended by them, i.e. they're able to comprehend and internalize it. We can have an experience with it, versus a light that's too great for us to have an experience with. Whereas the influence, which does not come within the category of revelation, but remains obscured and concealed and is not apprehended by the world, is not described as being invested in them, but as encircling and encompassing them. This is the whole thing about the difference between mamale and soviv, and even that kind of light is still not essence light. Therefore, since the worlds belong in the order of the finite and limited, it follows that only an extremely minute and contracted reflection of the flow of the infinite light of the blessed in self clothes and manifests itself in them in a revealed form, and this only to animate them in a finite and revealed state. For creation to come about, there must necessarily be at least some glimmer of godly illumination, albeit in an extremely limited form, for this enables creation to be finite and bounded. But the principal light that is without contraction to such an extent is called makif, encircler, and soviv, encompasser, since its influence is not revealed within the worlds, inasmuch as they belong in the order of the finite and the limited. All to say different measures of light and how they come to the world. Now, saying all that, when we look at the verse, Va'avadetem es Havaya Elokechem, that you should serve God, that is written in the third person narrator of the Torah. When you will serve Havaya Elokim, that is third person narrator. You see it, serve God. Verach aslach macha ves bemecha, that's also third person. He will bless your bread and your water. So when you will serve Havaya, your Elokim, then Havaya will bless your bread and water. Vasirosi machla mekirbecha, also we switch to the first person. So the third person narrator, the essence of Ein Sof, which is usually distant and withdrawn, is motivated to active involvement through man's service to remove illness. What are we retaking now from these verses to say you affect him, you don't affect him, etc.? We said, oh, you affect him on a lower level, but not on the higher levels, you don't affect him. Now we just redefined all of that. We're saying actually when you look at the two people speaking in the verse, you see a third person and a first person. The first part of the verse, serve Havaya Elokechem, that's third person. That's the essence narrator is speaking. As in, when you will serve Havaya, he will bless, Havaya will bless your bread and water. Third person narrator is telling us. Then the third person narrator switches. After you have done this, the third person narrator is, and now I'm going to get involved. I was telling you about what a lower dimension per se was going to do, and now the third person is now entering itself into the picture. And that is where it says the third person narrator, which is usually distant, withdrawn, is and removed from the world because of what we've done with our service, is now motivated to actually be involved within the world. To the extent that it says, I will remove illness from your midst. Usually it's, I'm too high up for these things. But now after our service, this beautiful service that we have for God, Vasirosi machla mekirbecha, I will remove the illness from your midst. Now the essence that was narrating is now saying, I'm now going to get involved to actually do this thing for you to get rid of the illness. To say that our divine service, when it is correct and when it is done as it should be, we can actually reach up to that level of essence. Which before we said, no, you don't affect him. Not if, when. Of course the Jewish people are going to serve God. The Rebbe would say when. So when then? That brings us now another dimension, and we're talking about the 2 and the 3. Looks familiar, these 3 attributes. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet. Kindness, strength, might, and harmony, compassion. Perfect balance of the 2. That's why you have right arm, left arm, the torso. The torso perfectly balances your right arm and your left arm. 1, 2, 3. When there is 1, then it's a single entity. When you have 2, you now have option for division. You have 2 different things. You can say, oh, we have Chesed, now we have Chesed and Gvura, now we have 2 things. When you have 3, now you have a third entity there. The third entity unites 1 and 2. Chesed is the idea. What is kindness? Kindness is when a giver gives to a receiver. What is higher goes lower. That's why water is kindness, Torah is kindness. It goes from a high place to a low place. Water does not flow because of gravity. Water flows because it's in the nature of water to go from high to low. The general idea of Chesed is when higher extends down to the lower. Gevura, what is the general nature of Gevura? Lower rises up to the higher. Lower rises up to the higher. In some instances, you could say God initiating down to us. You could say us initiating up to God. We have the water metaphor, gevura is fire. Fire goes upward. That's why if you strike a match and you hold it, it will burn itself out before it reaches your fingers as long as nothing else is acting upon it. Because that is the nature of fire to do that. Because that is what gevura is. Fire breaks something down to its parts. So you have chesed on one, gevura on the other, each moving in different directions. Tiferet, what's tiferet? Is harmony. It's the perfect balance of the both. It harmonizes, it balances, it unifies both. That's why it's considered truth. Because truth figures everything out. What is true unity? We're going to make a coalition. What is true unity? True unity is not making everything the same. True unity is when there's an awareness of another entity and yet the unity is maintained. As in, true unity is not uniformity. True unity is unity. It's not everyone must be the same. It's we can take all these different parts and make peace between all of them. That's what Tiferet does. That is why that's truth. And that is when we're looking at things, you're talking about God in different dimensions, etc. God, remember Osa Shel B'Mroma, God can take all these different entities. He creates unity without making them not themselves. God doesn't have to undo what the self is to create unity. He could have the angel of water and the angel of fire and create unity between them. And they're still the angel of water and the angel of fire. They're still chesed and gevura. And God still maintains a balance between them. So where are we going this whole thing with 1 and 2 and 3? Because we're talking about how the third day is going to be higher than the other 2 days. Remember that verse from Hosea. Now, thus it seems that divine service not only affects Havaya, as in not only that level, up to that level, but also the essence of Ein Sof. So also up to the highest levels. Now that we just introduced this, it seems that we affect at that level. And yet, it already stated that man's service doesn't affect on levels above Ishtalshelus, the chain of creation. We know Havaya has some connection to the chain of creation. It establishes what the structure of the attributes are. So we know that we have an effect there. But now we just introduced this whole new thing about the narrator becoming the I in this is getting involved in it. And we have 1, 2, 3, and the 3 is the highest level because that's the third day where the essence gets involved, etc. Is this true? This is not true. What's going on here? Essence must be above change, ergo man's divine service. As in, you can't say that our divine service affects essence or it's not essence anymore. The whole point of essence is that it can't be changed. It's the core entity of something. There's no change to it. You can't change an essence or it's not essence. By definition, you can't define essence because it's just essence. Yet man desires a relationship with both revealed dimensions and Hashem's essence. Without results in a lack of unity between Hashem's essence and the world. So now we're establishing a new thing. This section that we went to told us that actually, at a certain measure, our divine service does something to God's essence. Because it has an effect. There's something motivates that essence now to get involved. And yet, because we're talking about essence, we can't change essence. It's not the essential core of something if you could still take it apart. As in, if you could still enact a change on it. Now we have a new question of what is going on here. We could or we can't affect. The essence is or is not involved. We understood how we could affect on the level of the attributes, the vessels, etc. But now you're telling us you have an effect above, but if you have an effect above, that means that we've created a change. Because before I was not affected by what you did, now I am affected by what you did. So that means you've changed. How can you say that essence changed? It can't change. It's cliffhanger. We don't have the answer for this yet. That's going to leave us off here at the text of everything that we just said. But ultimately what we're getting to is that you can't say you don't affect God's essence or we don't have a complete relationship. On the other hand, you can't change God's essence. So what is going on here?